Hi, I'm Jordan.
And I'm Doyle. And I've got something I've got to say tonight. Jordan, what would you say if I told you that my right to throw a punch ended at the very tip of your nose? Go.
um, so I would say, uh, what a cliche statement, Doyle. No, um,
Of course.
yeah. I think there's a lot to unpack from that statement. I think it's an important statement to look at and see about, maybe why it's a little bit of a cliche, and but what I think the meaning is intended behind that, or what it's
Right.
trying to convey, and kind of maybe we can have a conversation around that. I know we've talked a little bit about this sort of thing in the past, and I know you and I personally have had a lot of conversations around this sort of a topic. So I think it will be interesting for us to kind of, again, unpack that, just kind of have a sort of maybe philosophical discussion and just see where it takes us, which will probably be to the end and beyond of this episode.
Sure.
But we'll see
Yeah.
what happens with that. So I think an important place to start with the unpacking of that statement is that there's two concepts that are really important to think about with it. One is the concept of right, because it really assumes what a right is, that anyone knows what a right means, where it comes from, why some people have rights, or do all people have rights. There's a lot of
Mhm.
questions around that particularly. Um, and then there's the implication of what is throwing a punch, right? So throwing a punch meaning physically that I'm cocking my fist back and then I'm pushing it forward to you, but I stop before I actually physically strike you. And what is communicated by that actual action. And
Sure.
so the rights discussion will take a little bit longer. I think the second part of that discussion with the motion of the punch, which is not actually a punch because it doesn't actually connect with you, right? Is the quicker conversation. So maybe we start with that. Um,
Sure.
so from my perspective, a lot of people would say, sure, yeah, that the right to throw a punch, your right to throw a punch ends at my face, meaning that as long as you're not hurting me, you can do what you want to, basically.
Hmm.
And a lot of people would disagree with that as well. I actually go in the camp of those who disagree with that. I don't think that it's necessarily 100% strictly your right to do that. And the reason being is because there's threat implied by you throwing
Right.
your fist at me. And you don't
Intent.
have,
Yeah.
yes, you don't have the right to threaten me, right? You have the
Sure.
right to say that, oh, you're ugly. Oh man, you have a real punchable face. You can say stupid stuff like that, no problem. But once you start acting like you're going to do something, then you have set off a chain of events that go outside of the bounds, I think, of rights. We could talk about that overlap later. But my opinion is no, you don't have the right to throw a punch at me and stop at my face. Because if I see you throwing a punch at me, I'm going to react as if you were actually going to punch me, because that is a threat to me.
Before the result. Right. Yeah,
Yes,
absolutely.
right.
And of course,
In my bound in rights, or guaranteed in rights, or however you want to say it, right to defend myself.
absolutely. And I know you know this, but I'm going to say it anyway. The question was a very facetious, silly
Yes.
question, because it's a case of it really gets to at least begins to open the door to the topic that I think that we really wanted to talk about, and that is, you know, first of all, what are rights, and we're going to define and talk more about that shortly. But right now, what is an action? What is it that people are doing? Right,
Yeah.
the authority, the permission, the uh, capability to do certain things, and the implication is uh, I can do it as long as it doesn't hurt you, right? But your response, I think, speaks to the well. It's not quite that far, right? Because there's the point in time where there's a threat or a belief based on the behavior could lead one to believe that harm was happen, and then the ability, the other person's um, authority, permission, you know, right, if you will, to use that term ahead of the conversation, to defend themselves, right? Like you said, because if you had to wait until the punch landed, it might be too late, right?
Right.
It
Well,
might
because
be
what if
too
the
late
punch
to
is a gunshot, right?
then it becomes a not a defense. It becomes a reaction or revenge or retribution, if you will, for the act that had occurred. And so I think it is a facetious point, but it does open the mind some, or at least mine, to the whole thing about, well, we want to be able to do what we want to do, right?
Sure.
Most people do, and most people are accepting of the situation where I can do what I want to do, and you can do what you want to do, as long as it doesn't affect me or doesn't affect someone else negatively. That's not as easily understood or as easily defined or as easily seen as people sometimes want it to be,
Well, and
right?
just those terms even affect somebody negatively. Why is that? Why is that the standard to which we should judge whether somebody else should be doing a certain action or not? Meaning
Sure.
that what constitutes negatively, right? That's a it's a hard fuzzy thing to define.
It is, and it lends itself to personal interpretation and personal belief systems and
Sure.
values and things of that sort as well, and that's why I suppose it becomes a very difficult and complex point to kind of break down. But what about, let's take it from the punch thing, because that one's I think most people can clearly see the flaws with that as a way to define someone's right or permission or authority to do something, whether it's self authority or external authority, internal or external. But there are other things, just in life, right, that people go about doing, or want to do, right? Drugs, or alcohol, or things of that sort. That people go, well, it's me, it's my body. I should be able to do what I want to do, and to a great extent, I agree. But there may be bounds, and the whole idea of defining those bounds. So what say you on uh, how those bounds? Because you mentioned about the harm, the defining the as long as it doesn't bother me or harm me or hurt me. But what would you say in categories like that, in those types of situations where what's the harm, what's the potential harm, what's the your perspective on that?
So, what situations particularly are you talking about? You mean the drugs and alcohol, or do you mean
Well,
other
just
things?
just those as examples, right? But if there are other
Sure.
similar
So,
kind of category of things, I'm not really
well, I
wanting to go
mean,
down the path of
the
talking about
yeah,
drugs and illegality and all that kind of stuff. That's not the
sure.
point, right?
Well, I
Although
mean,
that can spawn from that
yeah,
conversation.
I think it's not exactly the same point, but it's the same line of questioning for sure.
Sure.
Um, so I think that I have a view that is pretty. I try to be as self-consistent as possible with the views that I hold, and I vision or I see myself as a principled man, and as such, I have to accept the consequences of the principles that I espouse and stand upon. If I don't, then I'm not certainly not a man with much integrity, and I try to
Hmm.
be that as well. So one of those principles is that um, I can't define for someone else what is harm for them, because I don't want someone else to define what's harm for me. Right? This is the golden rule, right? Treat your neighbor as you would like to be treated, and that's one of the I guess consequences of the code that I live by is that um, I may not agree with what you do, and in fact, I may vehemently disagree with what you do, and I may be using every breath and moment every breath in my body, every moment I have to try to persuade you to not do what you're going to do, something that I see as harmful. But I don't believe that I have any again, we'll keep falling into this word right, but right
Sure,
to stop you by using force, right? That has to be the line, is me initiating that force against you. It's different if I see that you are aiming a gun at an innocent bystander, or really anybody at all, right? Because I have to act in that moment based on what I believe that where the problem lies, right? But if I see that you're aiming a gun at somebody that I know to be innocent, then I feel that it's within my right to defend them. That's escalating, right? So I mean, that's the whole upper bound of the force side of things. But I know that wasn't the intention of the question. The question was really the opposite end of it. But so I want to take that extreme example to say that there are times, I believe, when it is legitimate for one to act in defense of another, but one should not presume to understand or know what's best for another unless you have some reason or basis for that. For example, if I had children, right? I certainly have a reasonable basis to understand what is best for my children. So if a random stranger is pointing a gun at my child, I'm going to take care of that threat, right? Because that is what that is a threat. Now, however, if it's some random person pointing a gun at another random person, I don't know what transpired before that action. So that could be a full legitimate response to whatever that person did. Perhaps, I don't know. Right? Unlikely if that person is unarmed, that's the correct response. But in that case, I don't want to insert myself into a potentially fatal situation. Is not my position to do such a thing, nor do I think it's anybody else's position. Again, we're getting very escalating because that's the so far. Let me pivot and look at more toward what you're talking about. What you're talking about is what people call victimless crimes, right? Where something things that are crimes now, right? So it makes almost no sense to talk about things that aren't crimes right now. So we can maybe eschew the alcohol to some degree, and I think that there's some actually. Well, maybe I don't want to eschew alcohol particularly. Maybe the thing is, because with alcohol particularly, I think that it's more dangerous than something like marijuana. I really, really do. And this comes from somebody who has never ever in his life used marijuana. I really believe that alcohol is more dangerous than marijuana. Of course, maybe that's me speaking from a level of ignorance because I don't have that experience, whatever. I think you would be hard-pressed to find many people that would argue in the opposite direction. And if they were, I would really want to know their reasons for that. Certainly from a health perspective, we know for a fact, particularly with marijuana, you don't have to burn it to inhale it. There's lots of other ways that you can ingest and imbibe it. So you don't have to necessarily get the breathing smoke problem, right? You can extract that out of it, and then when you do that, then there's very little evidence that there's long-term problems with even high marijuana usage. I don't want this to become like a marijuana podcast, but suffice it to say that I think that alcohol is much more dangerous than marijuana. So there's that. But I don't want to stop somebody from drinking. I mean, if that's what you want to do, I think that if you really indulge in that, on a frequent basis, you're at best you're going to be wasting a lot of your life, right? And then at worst you may be completely destroying your life, and greatly shortening your life. Mm-hmm. So, but if that's what somebody wants to do, I mean, I don't think that it's certainly not within my right, I don't believe, to stop them. Now, I may do everything I can to persuade them, right? Could be, maybe it's my best friend and I can see that he's an alcoholic and he's really just killing himself drinking. I would do everything I could to be like, brother, what can I do to help you? I really want to help you through this problem that you got, or try to convince him it's a problem if he doesn't believe it's a problem. Do whatever I can. And so I would do that, but I don't have the right to go and try to pour out all of his booze or whatever to try to protect him or anything of that nature. So point being that it all falls back to this idea that I don't want other people to define for me what's a harm for me to myself. So I find it not correct for me to define what's a harm to them. Harm in the sense that it requires force to prevent or to ensure.
So it raises the question. There are layers and degrees of harm, or potential harm and harm, right?
Mm-hmm.
Because we talked about the punch, using that again, and it stops at the nose.
Right.
There is some degree of harm, right? Because it creates fear, if not physical
Absolutely.
harm, it creates potentially could create fear. And that's a harm, right? I mean, people don't like. Well, some people like to be scared. That's the reason they like to watch horror movies and things of that sort. But I mean, those are.
But you only like that because you know it's in the context of you're not going to get hurt.
It's protected, right? It's artificial,
Yeah.
right? But when you talk about the alcohol, and that's one that I think alcohol, because I agree with you that alcohol has probably greater impacts and risks to an individual, the misuse and overuse and abuse relative to marijuana, because it's kind of hard to OD on marijuana. Not that I know I don't, but I've just based on
that's what I understand about it too. Sure.
Yeah, but one could. I mean, there have been alcohol deaths, right? The alcohol poisoning, where they just drank too much and it just poisoned the body. What about the other degree, other layer of harm, potential harm to society? And by that you go, but what does that mean? Well, a father that is an alcoholic and he's no longer providing for his family and his children, and maybe the children are endangered because he's drinking and driving and carrying his children with him. And obviously, I know the law can respond to that, but I mean, but that's the law, that's the statutes, right? Versus the idea of harm. What say you on, and I don't mean to be reusing that phrase too much, but that just seemed to come out naturally. What do you say about that kind of layer or degree of harm that gets out of the individual and gets into the community and the society?
So I want to take out two things that you're talking about, because there's we got to be careful with words here, because when you say harm to community or society, I don't think that a drunk person driving with their child in a car is a question of harm to society. It's a question of harm to the child. So that child's being harmed by the parent. So I think that's a clear case, right?
But what if it's another person that he's driving, impaired and wrecks? I mean, is the harm only when the accident happens and the person is injured or killed, or is the harm the risk? That's sort of where I'm getting.
The harm has to be a result of something happening, right? Because the reality is because think about it from a logical perspective. If I let's just say I do something really stupid and I get drunk and then I go drink, or I go drive. Right. I guess that would be about right.
So have you already been imbibing? Is that the
right? Get even drunker. So I get drunk and I go drive, and I have a wreck. And let's say thank God I don't kill anybody. Nobody really gets hurt. We just have some car damage, right? And that's it, right? There's harm there because clearly property was damaged, but nothing like it could have been if somebody was actually injured or God forbid killed. So there's clearly harm there. What if I get drunk and go drive by myself, and I go and make it home and I'm fine? Was there harm there? If there was, we have to point to where that harm is.
Okay, so I was asking you that question, but okay, boomerang it back to me.
Well, it's not a boomerang. It's a rhetorical question, right?
Sure.
I don't think that you can point to where the harm is, right? Because that's the society, right? I understand what you're saying.
Then how do you point to the harm of the fear? That's sort of why I made that parallel. That is there a layer, a degree,
because you can see it. If somebody's punching you and the fist is coming at your face, you can see it. You know it. You're aware of it, right? That's the harm, that you see it. You know it. You're aware of it. If you're driving, and you see somebody who's a drunk driver, you are definitely within your. If you want to sacrifice your car, you're definitely, I think, within your total right to ram them off the road. And then you have to figure out the things about it later. And of course, that's not legal right now, right? But I'm saying that I think that would be an acceptable resolution to that, to stop other people from getting hurt, because you're protecting other people at that point. But you again, maybe that's only valid out in the middle of nowhere or something, because like then your wreck could harm other people. So there's risk everywhere, right? That's the real thing.
But you're answering the question the way expected you to answer, or I would have logically driven to that answer. I wouldn't have used that analogy, although that's a pretty good one, I think, because most people, I think any of us that have been in this world for any length of time as an adult have probably seen someone that you perceived either was drunk, impaired, not paying attention, or something.
Sure.
You've seen the vehicle and you go, oh my gosh, something's not right about that vehicle.
Totally.
What do you do? What do you do? Do you ram them off the road? It's never occurred to me, although it may now. That if I see it again,
I wouldn't recommend it.
No, but you think, well, call the police. Well, you call the police, and by the time the police, no one say, okay, yeah, okay, then the person is long gone unless you follow them. Well, follow them. Well, that's real safe. Right. You have someone that's impaired. Then what do you do? I mean, you watch and witness and become, I saw that happening. I knew they were going to kill somebody, and by Jimmy Joe George, they did. But the point I'm getting at is the fear harm enough to take a defensive act? And you said, in some case, you said you felt that was within your right, within a person's right to save and protect others.
There's the distinction between that defensive act and that proactive prohibition, right? Of saying that this activity is in and of itself harmful, right?
Okay. I see the distinction that you're making there,
right?
But it's a case of not the action, but the associated behavior surrounding that action.
Well, it's akin to like this. If I get on the road and drive, I may be met by a drunk driver, and so there's that risk, right? And so, is that harm to society? It was the same question of, if I go out into the woods and I happen to be in a field or in the wood that I don't understand or know that there's hunters in, and I get hit by crossfire or something like that, or not crossfire, but I get hit by hunter fire. That risk is there, and it's really the same thing. But you have to ignore the idea of drunk driving laws to take the. But let's say there's no such thing as a drunk driving law. At that time, those two activities are the same thing. Do we believe that we should stop hunters from hunting? And this is weird, because it sounds like I'm trying to make an argument for driving drunk. But
I thought you were going down the Second Amendment path. But
well, that too.
Either way, there are paths to go down should we want to at some point on those topics.
Right. Should we stop hunters from hunting? Because they may hit a stray person walking in the woods, versus, but I'm getting myself in a knot here, because I'm not really trying to argue that we shouldn't have drunk driving laws, but my point being is that there's risk, right? You go out into the world, no matter what, there's risk, and no matter how many laws, let's say law is how you can actually stop, or you at least believe that you can stop people from doing behaviors you don't want them to do, the things that are harms to society, then you would want to make a law against drunk driving, but does that stop drunk driving? There's laws against drunk driving. That's kind of the point. It's reality you have to deal with.
You do know that laws don't prevent anything.
Yes, I know this. Of course I know this.
I know you do. And which, my undergraduate degree is in criminal justice. Not that I'm a legal expert. I'm not. But I know a little bit about thimble full about the legal system. Actually worked in it for a number of years when I first got out of college. Laws are made to react to behaviors that have occurred, not to stop. Right? One of my instructors in college was a former FBI agent, and in our crime prevention class, he showed us all the tricks. So if we wanted to, we could have become pretty good crooks, because he showed us how to break in, right? And he said, "I'll show you this." He said, "Because this is what the crooks know." Not that I expect you to go out there and do that. He said, you need to understand crime prevention laws don't prevent crime. All they do is slow down the criminal. Locks and crime prevention and laws keep honest people honest, right? So the people that aren't going to break the laws aren't going to break them anyway. Even if they weren't there, they wouldn't do those behaviors.
That's my position, and that's what people don't understand. It doesn't keep honest people honest. Honest people are honest. Period. End of story. That's
yes. Fair clarification. It doesn't keep them honest. They would be honest regardless.
Yes.
Right. Yes.
They're not an honest person. If we evaporated all laws right now, or removed all laws right now, and somebody would go and murder somebody, they're not an honest person. Period. At their core, they're just not. That's the thing that people need to realize, and I think people just don't understand. Not to say that they're irredeemable. I don't mean that at all. But if somebody is there's like some writing on some piece of paper that's stopping somebody from doing something that's really heinous, I have no problem saying they're not a good person. Not that they can't become a good person, but they're not a good person.
Well, there's this lady that's really, really close to me, and we talk a lot about worry, right? And how do you not worry? And the conversation that we've had it so much now that she can have it with me standing there not saying anything because she can repeat my part. And my part is if worry changed a thing, I'd say worry all day. But worry doesn't change anything for the good. It doesn't. The only thing it does is changes things for the bad. And I think there's a parallel there with the law.
I got a parallel too. I'm sorry. I'm go ahead. Please continue.
But I mean, the point of the laws, they don't do anything good, right? They deal with bad and or create bad in some cases.
Yep.
Right. By statutorily criminalizing certain behavior that, to your point from up in this conversation, to your point that. Why is it wrong? I mean, it's what does it harm? What's the harm? And who is to define what harm is? And I think not to get into deep of a historical perspective, but I think that's a fallacy, a flaw, and these are things that are just my eyes are starting to open over the last weeks and months have been opened more widely than ever in the past. And I'm a pretty young guy, so not really. But there's things you just go. We took things for granted for so many years, for so long, for generations upon generations, and you go, why is it that way? And I think laws are one of those. Laws. Think about the laws that we have today compared to the laws that were on the books 200 years ago, right? Yeah. Back in the early 1800s, there weren't that many laws. Right. It was all about righteous people. And then if something, you protected yourself. Yeah. And we've seen all the cowboy movies where, they had a sheriff in town, but typically they just happened to be somebody they said, hey, we need you to help protect us. We need you to take care of the criminals that we bring to you. We're going to protect ourselves. I'm sorry, I need to make that clarification.
Yeah,
because they did, and basically the sheriff just took care of the bigger, badder criminals. Or what, or manage the jail, right? The 2-cell jail that they were just in there until they could get the circuit judge to come through.
Most sheriffs were basically your town mediator, right? Yeah, because you would have people that like bar fighting, and he would get there. All right, guys, who started this, right? And then there'd be an honor system and be like, yeah, I started it, and like, why? Well, so he was messing with my cows the other day. Did you really do that? Yeah. All right, get in the jail for a day. That sort of thing. I mean, it was really like wrist slappy sort of stuff. Sure. But it was a system that everybody respected, right? And because of that, it worked. Because
even the criminals.
but for the most part, yeah. Because the reality of it was that. People took responsibility for their own lives, for their own actions, and tried to be as honest as possible. Don't get me wrong. I'm not painting some Pollyanna picture of the past, because there was lots of negative stuff too.
Absolutely, sure.
But a lot of that worked because of the scale, right? You're talking about 100 people, like tops. Like, come on, that's like big. If you're talking about like in the West, back then, and so everybody knew everybody. Everybody knew everything about everybody, and it was there was like you couldn't hide anything.
Mm-hmm.
But of course, that's not where we're at now.
Right. Right. So I think we have gotten to a vehement agreement on the idea of harm, potential harm, and the self authority to determine, or at least we believe this. We're not talking about the statutes. We're talking about just from a personal and interpersonal perspective or intrapersonal perspective.
In the term of the system, extra legal.
Extra legal, right? That there is a at least to me an absoluteness about the choices of things that I can do, and the my ability and my prerogative to determine the amount of harm that is acceptable to me, not
Yeah.
someone else tell me what's acceptable harm to me
Yes.
for me. And and even when you stretch that out to the question that I posed earlier about what about the layers or the degrees of it as it goes to society, I think you said it well, that even then there's this degree of self determination unless the action results in harm,
Yes.
right? And I think sometimes that harm can be uh, universally understood, and by that I mean it's not a matter of how many knots on your head you got because as a result of it, but it could be some somewhat empirical outcome or result,
Sure.
tangible outcome or result. Now, going back to the drunk driving perspective, that's one that there's a very thin line to where it can go from acceptable to tragic pretty quickly. But
Yes.
to the point I think you made earlier, you weren't arguing against DUI laws, and I'm not making that either. We're just using that example as an extreme analogy or extreme case to sort of see the point,
Right.
and that it's it's more absolute than people uh, want to acknowledge or even realize sometimes. And
You're right.
they surrender those prerogatives for decision making to I won't say to the government, but to the statute makers, because they do surrender those rights, right? Because
Sure.
if you believe in how our system of government and legislation is expected or supposed to operate, that the legislators are not born into those positions, although sometimes that's almost questionable if they are or not, because families tend to have the lineage, that continue to serve, but they're supposed to be elected by the people, right? And so the whole
It's even more
aspect of
fundamental than that. It's even more fundamental than that. Our entire, if we're talking about the United States, our entire country was founded, and then the Constitution. Again, we need to have a separate conversation about the Constitution. But the purpose and the idea behind the Constitution, and this is well documented in James Madison's writings, was not that it was instituted as a rights holder or a rights grantor. It was that the people or the states, however you want to think about it, had their inherent rights that some of them they granted to the federal government because it would protect them in ostensibly a better way than the individual states or individuals could themselves. And so, versus most people think about that inverted.
I think that's a real nice segue into the rights point, because you mentioned that they're what was the term you used? It was not the one that's in the Constitution, the inalienable rights. You used a different term that implies
Innate.
Yeah, and you said inherent, right? I think
Or
inherent, right?
sure, yeah.
But that's what was said, right? That we are endowed by our Creator with inalienable rights.
Sure.
and most school children at some point in time through their educational years will encounter that and not have a clue what that means.
What document was that?
The Constitution or the Declaration of Independence?
Which one?
That's what I'm asking. I'm asking you. I narrowed it down to two. It's not the Magna Carta.
Manifest Destiny. No, it was the Declaration of Independence, and Declaration of Independence is a vastly superior document to the Constitution, in my personal opinion. We need to have a conversation about that. I think that this is a good place to wrap it up. I want to mention two things, though, because we may not come back to the things we talked about today, and these two things are relevant to the things that we talked about today.
Sure.
We talked about criminal justice a little bit, and one of the problems is that, and you were talking about how I think about how laws are framed or whatnot. And this was related to the point of not being deterrent to crime. Right, crime's going to happen, and part of the problem is not only is it a deterrent. There's a lack of disincentive, and that sounds like a weird way to phrase it, but there's a lack of disincentive to breaking a law because our criminal justice system is punitive and not restorative. And what I mean by that is that when you are found guilty of having broken a law, the way that we assess the damages for that generally are, and this is particularly criminal law, right? We're not talking about civil law, but in criminal law, the way that we assess the damages for that are through punitive measures. So you have to go into prison, parole, all that kind of stuff. Versus it being restorative, that the person found guilty of the crime has to pay remuneration to those they committed the crime against.
Go ahead.
And so that lack of having to pay that remuneration, like on its face, is problematic because two things. One, it does not acknowledge the loss of the person who has been committed the crime against, or their party, and two, it creates a bad system that allows this sort of thing to fester and grow and fester and grow and just spiral out of control. And that's what we have with the federal prison system, and even state prisons, all prison system, really. Sure. That's my opinion on it.
A sad commentary on what you just said. I mentioned earlier that I was my undergraduate degree was in criminal justice. Over 40 years ago, when I was in that degree program, one of the things that we were taught or we learned was this. There is a theory, and it was a divided theory, on what the purpose of the criminal justice system was. Was it retribution, punishment, or was it restitution, which you use the term remuneration, very similar. Yeah. But I mean, those were the two terms that when you take a test, you had to write what is retribution, what is restitution, and defend, right? As they try to teach you to think, how to critically on. But it was a divided a group of divided thinkers on criminal justice theory, even over 40 years ago, and it still exists today.
Oh, sure.
Although I think the division isn't as strong. I think it's more stark that the system has ditched itself more in the retribution, in the punitive, right? Add more years, add more prisons, add more,
because again, there's a perverse incentive to do that.
And the second sad thing,
what's that?
The recidivism rate in the late 70s, actually the early 70s, because I was studying in the mid to late 70s. I just gave my age. But the recidivism rate was at 2/3, 60 to 65%. Same thing it is today, if not higher.
Right, exactly. And if a system truly worked, right? if a system truly worked, that should be trending downward.
Yeah, absolutely.
Because there's just too many incentives on both sides. Criminals are incented to deal and accept the system. Yes, and then there's the incentives on the side of the system itself to grow, so that the because there's private industry around it,
Mhm.
and that private industry is engaging in corporatism, which is an extremely anti-capitalist behavior. Extremely, I can't say that in strong enough terms. Extremely anti-capitalist behavior.
So make sure you let us know how you really feel about that.
Right, dude, I do. Because people are like, oh, that's
Understood.
capitalism. No, it's not. It is the exact opposite of capitalism. Like,
Yeah,
holy crap.
it's manipulativism.
Yeah.
All
And
right.
so the other point that I wanted to make, the first was
Mhm,
the retribution versus restitution
mhm.
thing, and the second thing is, and this to me underlies is the fundamental principle that I think people miss about this is that law can never create or instill virtue ever. People see that as the function of law, and it never can and it never will, because the people who butt up against those laws have already lost some measure of virtue, and that's why they're in that position bumping up against it. Of course, we could talk about the surface there because there's so stupid laws and all of that kind of stuff, but I'm talking about things like you were talking about, the generally like murder, rape, things that are
Right.
generally like anybody would accept that that's wrong. Um,
Indisputable. Yeah.
right. And so
Wrong.
those laws can never instill those virtues. Thus, they have no reason to exist per se in a monolithic system that applies to everybody. Because only if you accept that they can instill virtue do they have any reason to be cast in a net that covers all of society.
Yeah. Yep. Agreed. Agreed. As always, we come from a place of discussion, differing points of view. Sometimes we feel like we go away from slightly perspectives, and I think we have pretty similar points of view. Certainly, parallel value systems, I believe, for
Oh yeah,
certain.
no
But
doubt.
I thoroughly enjoy uh, bouncing thoughts, ideas, and even sometimes a little gig just to get the energy up, because I think that sort of is you know the whole idea behind we got stuff to say. We've got
Oh yeah.
things we want to say, and we're just two guys, talking it out and getting things off our chest, sharing what we think and feel and believe, and I'm thrilled for the privilege and opportunity to be able to do it.
Absolutely.
Enjoy doing it with you.
Same, likewise, Doyle. I really appreciate the opportunity, and I have to say that I really enjoy engaging with these kinds of topics at this sort of cerebral level, because I think that it's important to do that, right? It's important not only for people listening, right? Because I think that there's definitely some benefit there, but it's important in refining how you think about things, right? Particularly with another individual, because they can offer a perspective that you don't have, and so that to me, I think that's one of the biggest indicators of why it's great that the First Amendment to the Constitution is the freedom of speech. Because
Yeah,
without freedom of speech, society, in any way that you want to cast it or imagine it, will absolutely fall apart.
no question, no question. I look forward to the next one. I would love, or I'm looking forward to digging more deeply into this inherent and inalienable rights. What we think that means,
Sure.
and how we think that it's being used, misused, and abused now. I think there's a lot of things in that space that I think we can chew on, and amongst others too. So.
I think, and here's a little preview. I think the concept and the word right is under a vicious attack and has been for decades, maybe centuries at this point.
Mhm.
Um, Likely centuries at this point, but certainly decades.
Yeah, no question about it. So, I certainly can't claim to be in the same category as the great philosophers, but I do get to feel like that even in some small modicum of measure, that I'm getting to be a little bit of a philosopher, to share some of my philosophies, and I love hearing yours. So, so maybe in a couple of thousand years, there'll be stone tablets that talk about the philosopher Jordan.
Well, here's how I feel about all that, is that any philosopher that we would regard as great, who regarded himself as great, is no great philosopher.
Excellent point. Excellent perspective. I agree. And I was saying all that tongue in cheek.
Sure. Yeah, I know. Yeah.
But we get to wax, whether it's poetic or not, that's for others to judge, but we get to wax a little bit on.
I prefer to wax prose.
Yeah, there you go.
Prosaically.
Well, all right, sir. Until next time, it's been a pleasure as always, and enjoy it, and look forward to the next one.
Absolutely, Bill. We'll talk to you next time.
Have a good night.
All right, see ya.